Tonight on Mark Latham's Outsiders, I'll be talking to Pauline Hanson, Australia's most controversial senator. I'll also be having a look at a new government report, research findings that totally debunk the left-wing agenda about so-called diversity and unconscious bias. We've got Zeg's cartoons, we've got the Outsiders Outhouse, your say, and boy, wait for the Left Lunatic of the Week. It's another doozy. Stay tuned. Trigger warning viewers, you've entered a very unsafe space. This is Mark Latham's Outsiders, Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs show. We're in partnership now with Rebel Media, that wonderful international organisation. We've formed up Rebel Australia in partnership. We've got our website. Very important to go to the website to register for all the Rebel information and campaigning, the videos, the whole box and dice. It's marklathamsoutsiders.com. There's the website address for you, marklathamsoutsiders.com. Go there, enter your name and email address and you're all on board. What you'll get from us, of course, is good old-fashioned Australian honesty. I'm here broadcasting in front of the Freemasons Hotel, one of the great Outsiders watering holes in Geraldton, WA. I know they'll be appreciating the program there in the Wild West of Australia. What we're on about, of course, is no PC, no social engineering, no leftist identity politics. We just give you old-fashioned Australian straight talk. And that is the way it needs to be. Straight talk about the issues that are important for the nation, the sort of things you just don't hear on the mainstream media. And let me go to one of those subjects, something that's received only scant coverage in the mainstream media, but it's a government report, one of the most important research documents you'll ever see. Now, what's it all about? Well, we know the leftist narrative about modern Australia. We hear it from Bill Short and the Greens, the left-wing media at the ABC and Fairfax. They're always saying we're a racist nation, we're a sexist nation, we're a homophobic nation, we're a pack of bigots. It's the whole Hillary Clinton deplorable label that they try and put on modern Australia. They're trying to control our speech and our activities by saying these people are unacceptable, they're all bigots, they can't be trusted, and the basic fundamentals of fair play and meritocracy in Australia have got to be junked in favour of affirmative action, positive discrimination programs, particularly in the workplace. They put this under the banner of unconscious bias. This is like a medieval superstition, unconscious bias. It's all through the leftist literature. It's a theory that says that even if people aren't actively knowing they're discriminating against women and Indigenous people and ethnic minorities, they're really doing it. They've lost control of their faculties. Unconscious bias is driving a bigoted Australian nation. Well, there's been some interesting research about this that totally discredits that point of view. It's an absolute bombshell in terms of evidence about what sort of country we've got. What we do know is that so much of the Australian public sector has been overrun by this conversation about so-called diversity, the argument that, well, essentially people like me, white, straight Australian men, over the age of 50 are discriminating against everyone else and holding them back in the workplace. And we've seen this agenda of ending meritocracy and running positive discrimination right through the Australian public sector. It's been through the Defence Force, even the Fire Brigade, right through all the major departments. And in the private sector, it's all through the corporate left institutions, the big law firms, accounting firms, Telstra, Qantas. It's just about everywhere. It's been a leftist takeover of Australian employment practices to say you can't trust a white straight man to be on a recruitment panel, you've got to give active discrimination and support to all the people he's against, the women, the Indigenous and the ethnic minorities. Well, we've seen it run through all our institutions to the point where at the Human Rights Commission there's a fellow there, Tim Soutphommasane, the Race Discrimination Commissioner, who's actually engaged in a policy of pretending that he's almost like a government minister, an alternative shadow government, where he's urging the major companies in Sydney and Melbourne to embrace racial employment quotas. And here's an example of Soutphommasane and his lofty ministerial rhetoric.
Do we have leadership that's fit for a country where almost half the population is either first or second generation Australian? It brings together 8 leaders in business, in government, in media, in higher education to become more visible and prominent advocates on cultural diversity. If we are honest about talking on cultural diversity, we must be frank about the presence of bias and discrimination and the role they play.
Well, who is this guy? He's unelected. None of us have supported him to be changing government policy and saying there's massive bias and we need racial employment quotas through the system. His theory is, and he's running this through the law firms in Sydney in particular, he says that if 10% of the general population is Asian, then we need 10% of the lawyers need to be Asian. Well, who says that the Asian community needs that support in terms of their own prospects in life? 10% of the general population is comprised of Asian Australians, but they've got 20% of the doctors, 20% of the university students and soon to be graduates, and they've got 90% of the students in the selective schools, the very best government schools in Sydney. And do the Asian communities want this sort of social engineering from the likes of Soot Pomasan, someone who sets himself up as a racial god? I got out on the main street of Cabramatta in southwest Sydney, a wonderfully vibrant, thriving Asian community. I couldn't find anyone on that street as I did the conversation there who wants to be a lawyer or wants their children to be lawyers. They want to be small business people, run the IT companies. So Soot Pomasan is an example of someone setting himself up as a social engineer, a racial god who's lost the plot. The Asian community doesn't need that support and manipulation from him. They're doing just fine and they don't want that support given their own aspirations. How arrogant of this guy to decide he'll determine what jobs young Asian people have got into the future instead of free choice and opportunity, meritocracy, the traditional Australian way. Now, thank goodness there's been one federal minister who's hopped into this bloke and given him a spray. It happened in my Daily Telegraph column just yesterday on Tuesday. Christian Porter, the minister responsible in the Turnbull government for multiculturalism, this is what he had to say about Soot Pomasan. Trying to have some prescribed mix of quotas in bureaucratically defined categories that would be the same across a wide range of different organisations seems to me to be the sort of social engineering project that represents a poor use of taxpayers' money. Well, spot on, Christian Porter, but don't just complain about it, cut the budget of the Human Rights Commission, eliminate the poor use of taxpayers' money and pull this bloke back into line. He's got no charter, he's got no statutory authority to be out there acting as an alternative shadow government with his own leadership council, spending money on racial quotas in the workplace. Total waste of money. Cut the budget and better still, abolish the Australian Human Rights Commission. How about replacing silly Gillian Triggs? Get rid of the whole wretched organisation would be a better strategy. But it's not just Soot Pomasan who's going down the madness of unconscious bias and thinking that we need an end to merit in Australian employment selection. We need a new strategy of quotas. It's also right through the Australian public service. How do we know that? Malcolm Turnbull handpicked Martin Parkinson's. Here's an example of Parkinson's disease, where Parkinson has ramped up the same kind of rhetoric about unconscious bias and the need for discrimination policies, put men in their place. Men can't be trusted to select people. We've got to almost automatically promote women and ethnic minorities into certain positions. Let's listen to this instance of the dreadful Parkinson's disease.
Yet there is no single definitive definition of merit, and the concept is something that is understood and applied subjectively. To compensate for that subjectivity, we try and pretend to become objective by building unnecessary processes to justify our hiring decisions, which in the long term actually counteract our ability to attract a more diverse pool of applicants. This problem is made worse when we factor in the presence of unconscious bias, which often means that selection panels see merit-worthy candidates as people with backgrounds and experience similar to their own. It's if the person looks like me, sounds like me, then they must be me, and I'm great, therefore they're great. Now, the gender equality strategy is designed to push our boundaries as leaders. Apart from targets and entrenching unconscious bias awareness, one of the major elements of the strategy will be implementation of a flexibility by default approach to jobs.
I can report to you this evening that guy, Martin Parkinson, the head of Malcolm Turnbull's department, has got egg all over his face. He hired and commissioned what they call a behavioural economics team inside the Prime Minister's department to look at this issue of unconscious bias and see, is there bias in the recruitment of senior Australian public servants? They ran a massive trial. It's documented here in this report, which is very, very significant. What they did was have a blind recruitment process. They took a bunch of applications with no names on there, so you couldn't identify the gender or racial background of any of the applicants. And it was a culling process with recruitment teams drawn from the public service, a culling process to see who would go on the short list and most likely get an interview. So they culled out with a blind recruitment process, and then they compared that to the identification of names. They put names on the CVs and the applications and made a comparison. With the names, of course, you can see someone male, female, get a guide to their ethnic background, maybe sort of a guide, are they Indigenous? So that sort of thing was performed in a very important research trial, and here are the results. Let's have a look at the first graph from this important report by the Behavioural Economics team in the Prime Minister's Department. Their report titled Going Blind to See More Clearly. You can see there, once the names were known, the effective identification on the short list, the female names are more likely to get through the culling process. Women are more likely to get an interview. There's a 3% boost in female names getting an interview relative to the blind recruitment process. And for men were less likely by 3.2% to get through to the interview stage of the recruitment. So if there is unconscious bias, it was against the men. They're worse off once their names are identified, their gender is identified on the CV. If there's unconscious bias, it's in favour of women because they were 3% better, 2.9% better once their names were identified on the CVs. And then let's have a look at the results for so-called minority groups. The second graph we're going to bring up, it's even more stark. Once the names were identified, female Indigenous applicants were 22.2% more likely to get an interview. Male Indigenous applicants, 9.4%. You can see that the brown column on the left-hand side under Indigenous. And for all the ethnic minorities, female minority groups, once people had a guide to the racial or ethnic background of one of the applicants, female got 8.6% increase in interviews, and the men in the ethnic groups 5.8%. The big losers in this process had to be losers once they went to identifying the names. Well, the females were about the same, but the big loser, of course, 6.5% reduction in Anglo-Celtic men getting an interview, getting through to the next recruitment stage. So it's absolutely stunning. And the other point I want to make out of this, you heard Martin Parkinson saying that essentially men will recruit other men into the public service because they look like them. It's the I think I'm great, they must be great syndrome. Well, the reality is the report finds that male reviewers, so these are the people doing the recruitment, they were markedly more likely to discriminate in favour of minority candidates than the female reviewers. Male reviewers, this is the whole ridiculous thing about white male privilege. The white men here, Anglo-Celtic men, were disadvantaged in the process. The male reviewers were 11.6% more likely to shortlist minority men, so they were against men, people like them, and 13.6% more likely to shortlist minority females. The female reviewers had only a 1.8% more likely to shortlist minority men and 5.5% more likely to shortlist the minority female. So there's no doubt about it. Unconscious bias is a load of baloney, an absolute load of bullcrap. This report proves it. No wonder you haven't seen it in the left-wing Fairfax press. It had one little report in the Canberra Times, one little report on the ABC to their credit, but essentially the mainstream media has ignored the report. The first time in Australia we've had this detailed type of research into whether or not discrimination applies, and we find out the discrimination is against men. White men are being discriminated against in the Australian public service once people know their names. So it's the first time we've had this hard research, credible research in either the Australian or private sector. And it's quite amazing that these are the results. The whole rhetoric about diversity, so-called inclusion, unconscious bias, white male privilege, in fact we're a terribly bigoted nature, all these white men are absolutely dreadful. It's all blown to smithereens. Blown to smithereens. It's complete and absolute garbage. So I urge you to read the report. We need more attention to this. It just shows what we've been saying all along, that Australians are fair-minded and reasonable, is out there, and if anyone's disadvantaged, it's men. In fact, the professional women I speak to say when it comes to recruitment in the workplace, there's three things that happen. One, their gender is not a disadvantage. Two, if anything, it's an asset. And three, if anyone is going to hold them back, it'll be other women. they get a fair go from men. So that anecdotal evidence is true. You've just got complete nonsense in the leftist hysteria, the leftist cabal pushing identity politics, positive discrimination and unconscious bias. Totally untrue. This needs to be exposed throughout the nation. And most importantly, Martin Parkinson, egg all over his face, Malcolm Turnbull needs to say to him, get rid of all your stupid policies of biased recruitment in the Australian public service. Just go back to the Australian principle of judging people on merit. Judge each individual regardless of race, gender, sexuality. Forget about all that baloney and get back to the Australian principle of a fair go. You're watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. After this break, we'll be talking to Pauline Hanson in an interview I recorded earlier today. Stay tuned for that. Well, Pauline Hanson, welcome to Mark Latham's Outsiders. Thanks very much for speaking to us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on with you, Mark. Yeah.
Now, Pauline, what we're doing here is an example of alternative media, and I think you more than anyone in Australian politics knows that we need alternatives to the mainstream media, especially all the left-wing bias at the ABC and Fairfax. But doesn't it raise the point that today young people in particular have got thousands of options in alternative media for getting their news information off Facebook and YouTube, programs like this, young and old. So do we really need those restrictive media ownership laws in Australia? Can't we just have an open market where people have got so much choice and perhaps new buyers can come in for these failing, rotten companies like Fairfax and Channel 10?
Well, I can understand what you're saying, Mark, but then again, look at the ABC. They are so left-wing, funded by the Australian taxpayer to the tune of just over $1 billion a year, and yet you cannot get fair reporting. Then if you look at the other side of things, do you want people like Rupert Murdoch or Bruce Gordon, or do you want Kerry Stokes to own the media and right across the board, whether it be newspapers, radio and TV, so they'll only put out their message? I'm concerned by both spectrums. That's why I'm trying to look at it in a balanced, measured way, that what is right for the country. I do not want our politicians being controlled by media, because they are, right? They're all dead scared of what's going to be printed about them, what they're going to say, and then once the media put it out there, they actually dance to their tune and then either pull back on what they truly believe in, and the media can dictate and determine elections, who's going to win or lose them, because people, without going behind the scenes and really looking at the in-depth of the issues, they are guided by what the media print.
What about competition with the ABC? I agree what you're saying. The ABC is a dreadful organisation these days, needs a massive shake-up. But if we had more competition against the ABC, wouldn't that be a good thing? And the competition would come from a deregulated market where some of these big players could get in and be more effective in providing an alternative to the left-wing ABC.
Look, I see that with some of the shows, but okay, you've got ownership now. They can own 2 out of the 3. So whether it be newspapers, radio, or newspapers, TV, 2 out of the 3 they can actually own. I understand what you're saying, that it gives them more competition. They can buy up the radio stations. I understand all that, Mark, but when you look at the major newspapers in our country, they're owned, 85% of them are owned by just, one person. In Great Britain, it's 54%. In America, it's only 14%. How much control do we want to give to these people? That's my concern. Look, I have grave concerns for it. I want the ABC reduced in its funding. I think the SBS should go. I think it should be actually pulled in with the ABC. The ABC has got 4 channels. SBS has got 4 channels. They've got radio stations, multiple radio stations. Combine the 2. SBS is costing the Australian taxpayer around about $280 million a year. They get money out of the commercials, which brings down the cost. So originally it's around about $400 million. They pull in about $120 million a year in commercial advertising. But the ABC, it's huge cost to the taxpayers, yet they can actually go out and bid on the project of $16 million. This is taxpayers' monies. SBS goes and puts in a bid of $2.5 million for the tennis. Now, what's that got to do with diversity? SBS,
You're spot on. SBS has just become another left-wing media outlet, nothing to do with their multicultural charter these days, the politics they're running.
And ABC can go out and buy a helicopter. Hey, hang on, the commercial stations can't. They can't afford that sort of money, but we're funding this. And then what we're paying their presenters, you're looking at Tony Jones in 2012, he was on $355,000 a year for what, one program a week? And it's over the top, and I will keep going after it until something is done about it in common sense and it passes the pub test as far as the Australian taxpayers go.
On another issue where you've got the balance of power in the Senate, we had David Leyonhjelm on the show last week, and he showed us that stunning photograph of the Senate voting where Leyonhjelm and Cory Bernardi were on one side of the chamber and everyone else was voting against them on the school funding, including your team of senators. Why did you support the extra $23 billion for schools when really we haven't got the teacher quality in Australia to make good use of that money? Are you worried the money will just be washed down the drain? It's a waste of $23 billion?
Of course it is. It's over the next 10 years that the funding's going to be put into it. Look, we need to get our act together as far as our education. We are slipping so far behind where we used to be at the top of the ladder many years ago. Our education is pathetic as far as I'm concerned. Now, part of my discussions with Senator Birmingham, the Minister for Education, was that we actually have to review the teacher, their quality, their people going on to university to become teachers. I want a national curriculum, and I actually want math, science and English to be taught right through up to year 12. So this has to be part of the national curriculum. Yes, we do need to address this, Mark. Is throwing more money at it going to help? I hope it does. But, there are schools and states that are struggling, and the worst state with funding is actually Western Australia. Queensland isn't doing too badly, but the state government have not put in their funding to match over the years, so they've just let it slide. So what this is going to do is force the Queensland government to put in about $800 million to support the budget as well.
Well, Pauline, I see you're campaigning hard at the moment on energy prices and their terrible impact on businesses and households. It really is getting out of control in Australia. What's the solution here? Everyone on the street is asking, what can we do to bring down power prices for the cost of living?
More coal-fired power stations. I want to see one in North Queensland. North Queensland has actually charged a difference in electricity prices. There's no competition there whatsoever. Look what happened to South Australia in the renewables that they've got down there, and they actually blew up the power station they had there. Hazelwood is shutting. Now that's another thing. You will not be able to get the power supply. Tasmania had trouble with their power over there as well. So I believe build coal-fired power stations. Coal is not our enemy. It is not our enemy. We cannot survive in this nation purely based on renewables such as wind and solar power. It's not going to happen. I'm actually pushing the Prime Minister to open up the fields in Western Australia, the Northwest Shelf, that we actually have 15% of the gas from there must come to our domestic market. It's every year. That's got to happen. Now I've learned in Northern Territory they've got that much gas up there to last for the next 160, 180 years, and they're burning off pegajoules of gas. It's just been burnt. It's been wasted. And then yet we're looking at AGL bringing in gas from America to Victoria to build a terminal there to unload gas, which we can get cheaper than what we produce here in Australia. The whole thing is because of our governments that have not done the right thing in policy direction. This is why we're paying enormous prices. We cannot lead the world on energy prices when we are going to see the destruction of manufacturing, industry, and households cannot afford the rising electricity costs.
What about Bill Shorten? He's got a 50% renewable target. Do you think he's fair dinkum with that? He looks like he'll be the next Prime Minister because the Liberals are self-destructing.
No, he's not. He's not fair dinkum. And I'll tell you this, Mark, I had a meeting with him in his office and he admitted that 50% is not workable. He admitted to me that he doesn't agree with it. So he needs to wake up to himself and be honest with the Australian people, because he's expecting to be Prime Minister of this country. He's not honest with the people with energy costs, renewables. He's not honest with people about weekend penalty rates. He's not honest with taxation, with everything. This man could be an absolute disaster for this nation if he becomes Prime Minister.
He told you face to face he doesn't support his own Labor policy, 50% renewables. What does that say about him? We can't trust him.
Well, exactly right. And he thinks 50% is unworkable and it's too high, and it is too high. We're going to drive industries, manufacturing, jobs, small business into the ground. I went up to Emu Park, which is Causeway Lakes, and I worked in the fish and chip shop there. Her last bill was $9,000. For electricity for a quarter. She just got her recent bill, $14,000. On top of that, $5,500 a month rent. They can't survive, Mark. Now, she shuts down. Those people who work for her, they're going to be without a job. She's a mother of 3 kids. Is she going to go on to welfare? This is the snowballing effect that is going to happen. So people out there must understand it is not the people that create carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is created through plant growth. It's actually from the oceans. 97% comes out of the oceans for carbon dioxide. So we've been led down the path like sheep to a slaughter. This is about different people protecting their jobs. This is about big business making a lot of money out of it. It's about, and we are the only ones. One Nation, especially headed by Senator Malcolm Roberts, the Senator for Queensland, and the One Nation Senator, we are the ones who are really pushing this whole issue and trying to get some honesty from the CSIRO, who cannot answer his questions. No one has the science of why they're pushing us down this track.
Well, you've been out there talking to the public, which is one of the great things about you. You're always on the road doing things. I've been out on the streets of Sydney recently. I visited the main street of Fairfield in Chris Bowen's electorate to talk to them. And let's have a look at what I found. Speak to Mark Latham's Outsiders. What do you think of Cabramatta?
I am not speaking English.
Nothing at all?
No.
No English at all? Okay, thank you.
I do know a lot of English.
You don't speak
no.
English at all, really? Think of Cabramatta?
No English, no.
No English at all?
Think of Cabramatta.
Syria.
Syrian, okay. What do you think of Syria?
Lebanon.
Lebanon. What do you think of Lebanon? No. Okay, no, okay, thank you. No English? No English? No.
I'm sort of doing
No English at all. But you said that very well. That sounded decent English. Cabramatta, just down the road. Good or bad? No, nothing. Okay. You don't speak English. Okay, thank you. Cabramatta.
sorry, not speak English.
No English?
Well, Pauline, 9 out of 10 people I tried to speak to couldn't speak English. How can we form a community? How can we make migration a success if people can't talk to each other in the national language of English? What are we going to do about this?
It's just, my mind boggles over this, and I cannot believe it. Good on you for going out there, Mark, to expose this. I don't know what reaction I would have got if it was me. But the whole fact is, it's absolutely disgusting. It makes me so angry. And this, again, is because of the political parties have not pushed for people to actually assimilate into our society. If you can communicate, you will assimilate and integrate into a society. But they haven't done it. They've allowed them here. They've formed their own enclaves. Go back to my original maiden speech. I said in 1996, this is what I said and why I was anti-multiculturalism. We are multiracial. But if we're going to live in a harmonious country, all treated equally and the same, get rid of this multiculturalism BS and say we are Australians. I get annoyed when people call themselves Syrian or Lebanese or English or whatever, Chinese. We are not. Say you are Australian, be proud of it. If not, go back where you came from.
The other issue is about the status of English as a national language. The government mentions it from time to time in different publications, but I don't think we've got legislation that actually declares English to be the national language. Would you like that? And in terms of the Constitution, we're going to have a referendum apparently about Indigenous heritage, writing that into the Australian Constitution. At the same time, should we write into the Constitution that English is our national language and there's an expectation that everyone needs to learn it?
Do we really need to put it in our Constitution? I don't know if we need to do that. it does concern me about putting the Aboriginal heritage into the Constitution, especially in the preamble, which I have been anti that for so long. My concerns is if we ever become a republic, we've acknowledged the Aboriginals as the traditional owners of this land. Will it revert back then to native title? Will we actually be questioned over our freehold title of this land? So I've got concerns about that. They're actually wanting to change, I think it's section 51(26) of the Australian Constitution, where it was passed in a referendum to take out any people of any race, to make it for any people instead of changing the word from race to people, which I totally oppose that as well. So these things, Mark, need to be debated on the floor of Parliament. We need to have a clear understanding, and people need to know what they're voting for and changes that are being made. But English is very important. What we've allowed, Mark, is people in this country to get their driver's licences using their own language. That's wrong. People go to vote in this country cannot speak English. How would they know what they're voting for or why they're voting? So they shouldn't have the vote. If they can't understand English, how do they know what they're voting for? That's another big thing. The government has given everything that's written in foreign languages, interpreters, doesn't matter what it is. They've never encouraged people to speak the English language. Get rid of it, everything in English. And if people want to go and maintain their own language, do it at your own cost.
And what about refugee settlement policies? There in Fairfield, they've got a massive influx of Syrian refugees. In New South Wales, former Premier Mike Baird said, we'll take in 7,000 Syrian refugees. And he had all this baloney that he was going to have them settle in Armidale and Albury and Wagga Wagga out there in country New South Wales. 95% of the Syrian refugees coming to New South Wales are in Fairfield, that one spot. Spot. And of course, a lot of them haven't got the good English language skills. Fairfield has the highest unemployment rate in Sydney. If governments can't fulfil their promise of dispersing the refugee settlement, isn't that just a strong argument to say, well, we can't bring them in because we're just creating the welfare ghettos of the future?
You are so right, Mark, and that's exactly the case and what's happened with other places. If we're not careful here, you have places in England like Birmingham and some of these places in England and in France that are no-go signs. The police can't go there. So they're going to have their own enclaves. If you allow the local governments to become under the Australian Constitution and form their own laws, you're going to have these areas that will make their own laws. So that's something that can never happen as well. So it concerns me. Australia is going to have all these little hot spots. This is this nationality here, you've got another nationality here. And then what's going to happen in the future is you're going to have civil wars. And I'll say that because people are very tribal in their beliefs and their customs and their laws. And if they don't assimilate and all treat equally under the one law, you're going to have problems. It may not be for another 10 or 20 or 30 years, but I can see those problems exactly like one country, like over in Europe, you have France and Germany, all these other countries, different cultures, different nationalities, and you will end up having problems.
Well, certainly the situation in Fairfield and Western Sydney is not good. What about the bigger issue of the national immigration program? I'm always amazed that Labor, Liberal and the Greens have all signed up to the one policy, Big Australia immigration, 200,000 people a year coming in. We used to have a national average of immigration program in the 20th century of 70,000, which would help in easing the housing demand and housing affordability crisis, help in easing the problem of sluggish wages growth and help in easing the massive congestion we're seeing in our major cities. So what's the one nation policy for the level of immigration into the future? Surely it's got to be lower than 200,000 a year.
Oh, definitely, Mark. I've said this all along right from the very beginning with the immigration numbers. When Howard came in, it was around about 150,000. He dropped it down to about 75,000. We can't keep going the way that we are going because what happens is that people are competing for those jobs, and we've also got lengthy queues for hospitals, for nursing homes, for schools, for all these services. Plus also you look at the congestion on our roads. But another big thing that we haven't kept up with is water. We haven't put in more dams to allow for the ever increasing population that we have. So you've got water, sewerage, these infrastructure projects that we need to have. We cannot keep bringing in these numbers that we're bringing in. it's, again, the general public here, people here are suffering because of the increased numbers. Who wants the increased numbers is you've got governments, they sell more housing, so they're getting stamp duties. The banks are lending more money, so they're actually making more money out of their loans. You've got governments that, or big business that are making more money because they're selling more white product, more white goods that are coming from overseas. So we're supporting these other countries around the world. I don't believe increased immigration, especially without those being heavily vetted, that are going to assimilate and are compatible with our culture and our way of life. And I will keep screaming from the rooftops, if we actually have 100,000 that leaves our shores every year, replace those 100,000. Let's clean up our own backyard and get that working correctly with our schools, nursing homes, hospitals, health, everything like that. Then when we get that right, then we can increase the numbers coming in.
Well, Senator, on the related issue of your Muslim immigration ban, don't you think Donald Trump, you and I are both fans of Donald Trump, don't you think he's got a better policy there with his travel ban, which is targeting the countries where the troublemakers are coming from? Rather than a ban on all Muslims coming into Australia, wouldn't we be better off to target the countries where there's a security concern? We know who these troublemakers are on the federal police files and the like. So isn't the Trump targeted policy a better one than a blanket ban?
I think that's part of it, Mark. I totally do. But if you understand Islam and you understand Muslims, even the moderate Muslims, now a lot of these people, if jihad was called, where are their loyalties going to lie? You know, this isn't something we need to address and we need to talk about. This is why I've called for a Royal Commission into Islam. We need to understand it. A lot of Australians don't understand it. A lot of Australians are very open-hearted. Yes, look, that's no problems, but, you know, these are wonderful people. That may be the case. How often have we heard of Muslims here that are actually speaking out against the terrorist acts or what's happening around the world? They say nothing. We don't hear from them. And you have that Muslim from down in South Australia, that Imam Tahidi. Mm-hmm. So he's actually come out and has spoken about it. And he said they are teaching radicalisation in the mosques. Now, he's admitted that. He said it's happening here. Now, he gets held down. He goes to an area like Canberra or goes anywhere and a Muslim, he gets spat on. Now, if he's, and I believe he's speaking the truth, and I've been speaking about that for some time, let's just take a step back. Let's understand what Islam is all about, what it stands for. And I've just finished reading the book by Noni Darwish. And she's actually grew up in Egypt. She now lives in America. She said Egypt has changed now to basically control where women have to cover up. She said we never did it years ago. They've actually got the numbers there and they start controlling it. She said now she's moved to America. Those ones that she knew and those ones that lived in Egypt are now living in America. They've actually gone very staunch Islam and the hate for the West, but they hide it until their numbers grow. Now, you know, I hate to say all this, but I want assurances. I want to know, will we be able to control in the future with the numbers that we have grown now to 2.6%, and you see what's happened in England, you see what's happened in France and Germany and Switzerland and Netherlands, you can name all these countries around the world. So I'm not going to back away from what I truly believe in before it's too late and we can't do a thing about it.
Well, the Muslim community is fairly diverse. I've got to know a lot of them in southwest Sydney over the years, and there's a community there, the Indian Fijian Muslim community. They were in India, persecuted. They went to Fiji, basically had to leave there, and they've settled in southwest Sydney. They work hard, they've learned English, they're making a good contribution. I know some of their children from the local school, friends with my kids. I mean, these are people I would personally vouch for. And I just think, isn't it unfair on that community to say there'd be a blanket Muslim immigration ban when they're an example of people doing the right thing, and we should be encouraging that and recognising it?
I hear what you're saying, but then again, when war was called in the 1950s, that we interned, Germans and Japanese and different ones, didn't we? It was happening around the world because you didn't know whether you could trust them, where their loyalties lie. It's a thing that happens in our country when people are in fear. And when we have more and more terrorist attacks or foiled terrorist attacks that has happened in Australia, thank goodness our authorities have been able to stop it before it happens. This is facts, Mark. These are actually happening in our country. And that's why I think people are in fear. And like I said, we see it happening so much around the world, is this push for Islam to dominate the world. And they're getting themselves into positions of whether governmental, not ministerial, but government positions or bureaucrats or in these positions. And it does concern me. And I'm not going to, and I'll say what I think about this. And I had one taxi driver and he said, Pauline, he's Muslim. He said, Pauline, he said, you are right in what you're saying about all this. He said, I was Muslim. He said, I walked away from it when I was about 14. I'm now married. I'm living here. He said, I love Australia. He said, but my uncle has told my father he must murder me now because I'm no longer call myself Muslim. And this is their views about the whole lot. And I just feel that I feel for these people, but we've got to figure out some way to ensure that we've got the right people here and not those ones that are using us to push their own agenda.
Well, Senator, just back on party politics, and we might finish up with this. There's a report today that there's a delegation of 20 Liberal MPs from regional and country areas who've seen Malcolm Turnbull and said there's a big disconnect. The Turnbull cabinet, which is mostly inner city Liberal and National Party senator types, no connection to the regions and the bush. There's a big disconnect. And they're saying out in their seats, it's Pauline Hanson who's getting all the votes. She's killing us, they're saying. How do you feel about that? And it must be a really good tribute to your effectiveness on the ground.
Mark, I'm doing what I was voted for, to actually get out there, to go out and talk to people, grassroots people. Rural and regional Australia is dying. And they don't get it. They don't understand. We're losing our farming sector. We've sold out too much of our land to foreign ownership who are going to grow the food and ship it back to their own countries. We're losing such an opportunity in this country. And they just don't get it. And I've often spoken to the Prime Minister about different issues. But what we will do is I will continue to speak to the people, listen to what they have to say. And I've been doing this not just since last year, Mark, for the last year. I've been doing this for the last 22 years. And I think I have a real insight into how Aussies feel. And I'll still put up those policies. I'll fight for what they think, what they want and what I think is right to move this country forward. But hopefully at the next Queensland state election, we're going to have people on the floor of Parliament. And I tell you what, if we are in a position, I want to work with Steve Dixon, who is the leader of One Nation Queensland, to really push Queensland forward. And I think that we can, and get the state moving and make an example for the rest of the country.
Are you swapping preferences with the LNP there? That's the big question.
No, look, we haven't. We're going to swap preferences with the Katter Party. I don't owe them anything, Mark. I don't owe the Liberal National Party anything. I think they're arrogant, I think they're rude, and I think they're bombastic. You know who I trust is the people themselves. Let the voters make their choice at the ballot box. And again, the Labor Party, they're worse. Their sheer arrogance is unbelievable. And if they've been doing their jobs properly, they'll get elected back in. If not, I say to the people, throw them out because it's time for a change.
Well, Senator Pauline Hanson, thanks for joining us here on Mark Latham's Outsiders. You're a straight shooter. That's why you've got so many supporters around the country. That's why you're an outsider too, talking the straight language of the Australian people. Good on you. Hopefully you've enjoyed the alternative media here and you can come back in the future. We'd love to have you.
Thanks, Mark. My pleasure.
Thanks, Pauline. And we'll be back after this short break with Zeg and his cartoons, the Outsiders Outhouse, and of course the Lunatic of the Week. Wow, wait till you see this crazy lefty. It'll make the paint peel off the walls. Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders here in front of the Freemasons Hotel in Geraldton, WA. Now look, we're very, very lucky on this program, fortunate indeed. How many programs have got a cartoonist in resident? Well, we've been well served for many, many weeks now by Zeg, our wonderful cartoonist, adding a lighter touch, some insight, some irony into the Australian political scene, and it's a special treat this evening on Mark Latham's Outsiders to say, welcome Zeg, welcome and thank you for the wonderful work you've been doing.
My pleasure,
now, mate. How did you get into cartooning?
Evening viewers. Well, it all sort of started around about the time I got married, Mark, when I was about about 23. Someone said to me, you know, you're not a bad cartoonist, you can draw, you could probably make a living out of that. And I thought, could I? Could I really make a living out of it? So, yeah, I started sending my cartoons off to newspapers and the like, and picked up a little bit of work. Some independent papers liked the work, the Bendigo Advertiser, when it was an independent paper then. And eventually I got the eye, actually, of our good friend Tom Switzer over there at
Okay, the Specky,
Spectator Australia.
Uh-huh.
And it's sort of all gone from there. And now I'm got my own blog, and now I'm the most famous cartoonist of the world because here I am.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I hope that's true. I hope that's true. Now, you whacked a few together for us this evening. What have you got? Pauline Hanson was here earlier on. Run us through this one of Pauline and her ongoing battle with the ABC and all those floggers.
Oh, well, there she is. She's back and she's staying. There we go. We've got the usual suspects there all gaggling around. You see the guy with the ABC mic. And then Turnbull said, what am I paying you for? Just put Pauline on Q&A tonight, and with the usual audience, of course, and you know, then they'll actually stop talking about me.
Well, the ABC using her as a distraction. How true. And now your second one, of course, goes to the trouble that Christopher Pyne got his party into. You're looking at Menzies Australian Liberal Party.
Do you remember the ad? Mahogany or pine. That's even if you don't remember the ad, you'll still get the cartoon. And there he is. You'll see the bloke laying there on the gurney, the deceased gentleman. Well, look at those ears. Who could that be? I think that might be our former Prime Minister.
Yeah, right on the slab. Right on the slab, stabbed in the back by Malcolm Turnbull. Mahogany or pine for the Liberal Party
and
coffin.
the big issue, the gay marriage, and that's why the rainbow flag draped over him there.
Great stuff, Zeg. Really appreciate it. And of course, you're doing more and more for us all the time. We're going to the Outsiders Outhouse, and Zeg has got his graphic there. It's got me on the thunderbox. I'm looking okay there, Zeg. And what we use the outhouse for is to say it's become the ultimate Australian expression of free speech and thought. It's probably the last place in the country now with all the PC censorship mob there where you've got some free expression as to what you're on about. So I'm on the outhouse, and we've got some viewer feedback, some letters that have been sent in this week. The first comes from Patrick from New South Wales, contributing to the Outsiders Outhouse, and he writes as follows. I'm an officer with the Fire and Rescue New South Wales with more than 20 years service and have witnessed gender bias that's existed for years within the organisation. It's against men. In 2016, the service launched a 50-50 gender recruitment policy, which has lowered the entry standards in the rush to fill the ranks with females. These lower standards will cost lives one day in an emergency situation. Nothing is more certain. Well, that's unfortunate, but Patrick's speaking from experience, and he goes on to say, I have examples of gender bias whereby female firefighters are given preferential treatment and escape disciplinary action, mainly because managers are too scared to take on a woman for fear of the obvious. Please highlight this issue on your show, Mark. Well, Patrick, we will be highlighting the issue. We're doing research on this. It's a worrying situation. Firefighters, along with our friends in the Australian Defence Force, anyone who's in an emergency or dangerous situation, it's very, very important to select them on merit. We can't afford to have selection that's on the basis of gender discrimination, because as Patrick points out, in emergency situations, that is just too risky. Our second contribution comes from Graham, a school principal, a government school in New South Wales, and he writes as follows. I know this is not the largest issue confronting us, but I thought you'd like to see some information re-education recruitment. There appears to be fewer advertised teaching jobs, and I think part of the reason is this. Automatic permanent employment for Aboriginal students upon completing their teacher education. I think this is unfair, and when I've asked about it, I've been told not to ask, as I could be seen to be racist. Yeah, Zeg, it is comical if it wasn't so true.
That's right.
And he wishes we had equity. Graham, who runs a government school in New South Wales, he goes on to say, I currently have approximately 10 temporary staff, teachers who work at school for more than 4 weeks, and most of them would like to get a permanent job. There seems to be little chance of these people getting an interview, let alone a job anytime soon. Yet we see many come from university, and I have to say their teaching management skills in most cases are poor. Well, it's another example of what I raised at the top of the show, that this positive discrimination that's out there weakens quality, and quite frankly, it's not needed. Because you saw there from the information out of the Australian Public Service that once the names are known, in fact, Indigenous people get a better go than white men in particular. So the discrimination's already there in their favour under a system where we've had it traditionally, people wanting to give them a fair go. We don't need extra loadings on top of that, particularly when it's at the cost of meritorious white male applicants. And finally, our third contribution from the Outhouse is from Oliver, a maths teacher in Brisbane, and he's referring to the show last week where David Lionhelm and I were talking about education funding. He says that Senator Lionhelm and I were absolutely right. There's a whole show that could be done on the rise of education academics ruining the system. Oliver writes, they are even wrecking maths, an area he knows about. Teachers are told to give primary school kids calculators to use instead of having them learn the times tables by saying them loud. The need for practice and repetition in arithmetic is discouraged. Then in high school, competition and exams are discouraged while take-home assignments for maths are promoted instead. Classes are graded by fluffy, meaningless criteria. Instead of kids earning their marks through their own effort, practice and study for exams the traditional way, they end up relying on the teacher's generous opinion to decide what grade he or she will give them. No wonder Australia is falling down the international ladder in school academic achievement. Well, Oliver was 100% right. We're losing rigour in the education system. It's why we're now ranked behind Borak's Kazakhstan. We need rigour, particularly in an area like maths exams and fluffy processes. That's no good. Oliver has raised a really important point that we'll come back to in the future. Now, our last segment of the show, Zeg, you're still with me, and
mate.
you've got the graphic here for the Left Lunatic of the Week.
Oh, look at that feminazi.
You've got them all there, you feminazi
What's he got
indeed.
there in a hand?
Well, Zeg, every week, you know, it's tough competition. There's scores of applicants for the Left Lunatic of the Week. It could have easily been Dr. Tim Soutphommasane from the Human Rights Commission with his zany racial employment quotas. It could have been Martin Parkinson, who's put in a shocker, contradicted by research out of his own department. But
we haven't got enough time.
We haven't got enough time for all the lunatics, but we're giving it to Clementine Ford, the craziest of them all. And it's in reference to this book signing she had. It's come to light through the Daily Mail. She actually signed a book. Can you believe this, Egg? Have you killed any men today? And if not, why not? She's promoting male murder. What sort of fruitcake is Ford?
She's crazy. I mean, this is the sort of thing you just... I mean, apart from the absurdity of actually saying that, well, what's the point of saying it? Well, I mean, it's just more cultural Marxism. Divide and conquer.
Well, and it also contradicts all that Fairfax, she's employed by Fairfax Media, all that Fairfax rhetoric about anti-violence, directed at men, and now we find out they're happy to employ someone who's promoting male murder, signing up there. You know, some of these leftists on social media say, oh, it's just a joke. What's funny about encouraging someone with the book inscription in saying, have you murdered any men today? If not, why not? I mean, it's just disgraceful, isn't it?
There's nothing
It
funny
can't be
about
anything.
that.
And imagine if a man wrote that.
Well, it's hypocrisy.
How would they go?
It's hypocrisy, you know, at its greatest. And if a man wrote that, he'd be up against the HRC. They'd be all over him.
They'd be up him for the rent, no doubt. He'd be run out of town. Now, Zeg, you put forward a cartoon that highlights the absurdity of Fruitcake Ford. Let's have a look. Run us through it, Zeg.
Oh, well, here we've got old Death there walking past Clementine with her book signing for Kill Men. And Death saying, appreciate your support there, Clem, but really I have enough work on at the moment.
I tell you what, it's a great drawing. That's her, isn't it? 100%, that's her.
That's her, and if you look on the old site there and that, you can see he has got enough work on with cultural Marxism and Islamo-terrorism. And notice the bird in the background? The vulture in the background, the UN.
Okay, Zeg, that's your interpretation on our Left Lunatic of the Week. So appropriate, Fruitcake Clementine Ford. So thanks very much, viewers, for watching Mark Latham's Outsiders this evening. We've got another great show for you coming up next Wednesday night. Join us then. Don't forget the website, marklathamsoutsiders.com. You can sign up there, marklathamsoutsiders.com, that all-important website address. Thanks for watching our program, and we'll catch you next week.